The glass shattered when I dropped it. Not at the party, not in front of everyone. Alone, in my kitchen, at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after my son's rehearsal dinner, when I finally let myself fall apart. I swept up the pieces myself. I always did. That's the thing nobody tells you about raising a child alone for 32 years. It's not the big moments that wear you down. It's the quiet ones. The Tuesday nights. The broken glasses you sweep up yourself because there's no one else to do it. My son's name is Garrett. He has his father's jawline and my stubbornness, which is either a gift or a curse, depending on the day. I raised him in a small town in eastern Tennessee called Harlan Creek. Not the famous Harlan, the other one. Smaller, forgotten. The kind of town where everyone knows which families have money and which ones are just getting by. We were the latter. I worked as a licensed practical nurse at Mercy Ridge Medical Center for 27 years. I picked up overnight shifts when overtime was available. I drove a 2003 Civic with a cracked dashboard and a heater that only worked on the left side. I packed Garrett's lunches every single morning until he left for college, because the cafeteria food was $3 a day, and $3 a day adds up to something real by the end of the year. His father left when Garrett was 4 months old. I didn't hear from him again until Garrett was in high school, and even then it was only a birthday card with a $20 bill inside. Like that was supposed to mean something. I threw the card away. I kept the 20 because we needed it. I'm telling you all this not because I want your pity. I'm telling you because you need to understand what I was carrying into that ballroom on the night of my son's wedding reception. You need to understand the weight of it. Garrett met Simone at a conference in Atlanta. She's a structural engineer. Brilliant woman. Steady. Careful with her words. I liked her the first time I met her. I still do. Whatever happened at that reception, Simone was never the problem. The problem had a name. Gerald Ashworth. Gerald Ashworth was Simone's father. Self-made, he liked to say, though people who actually build things from nothing rarely feel the need to announce it quite so often. He'd founded a mid-sized construction firm outside of Chattanooga in the early 90s, turned it into something substantial, and somewhere along the way had developed the particular kind of arrogance that comes from never being told no. I met him briefly at the engagement party. He shook my hand and looked at me the way certain men look at women my age. Not rudely exactly, just as though they've already decided you have nothing interesting to say. His wife Renata was warmer. She held my hand with both of hers and said she'd heard so much about me. I believed her. I liked Renata. Gerald was another matter. What I didn't know then, what I would not learn until 4 months before the wedding, was that Gerald Ashworth and I had a history. Not a personal one. Something older and heavier than that. The name on the incident report was Ronald Pruitt. Ronnie, we called him. He was 31 years old. He had a daughter named Lily who was 7 and a wife named Susan, and he coached his daughter's soccer team on Saturday mornings. He worked for a subcontractor called Ashworth and Partners, Gerald's firm before Gerald rebranded it, on a commercial project in Knox County in the fall of 2003. Ronnie Pruitt fell from an improperly secured scaffolding on the morning of October 14, 2003. He fell 22 feet. He survived, but the spinal injury left him paralyzed from the waist down. I know all of this because Ronnie Pruitt was my patient for 11 weeks at Mercy Ridge. I know the rest of it because of what he told me during those 11 weeks. Because he trusted me the way patients sometimes trust their nurses, more than they trust their doctors, more than they trust their families, because nurses are the ones who are there at 3 in the morning when everyone else has gone home. Ronnie told me that the scaffolding had been flagged in an internal safety review 6 weeks before his accident. He told me that the site supervisor had signed off on it anyway because replacing it would have delayed the project by 2 weeks, and the project was already over budget. He told me that when his lawyer tried to subpoena the safety review documents, they couldn't find them. He told me that the settlement offer from the company's insurance carrier had come with a non-disclosure agreement and that he'd signed it because he had a daughter and a wife and no income and no choice. Then he handed me a folded piece of paper. He said his wife had made a copy of the safety review before the originals disappeared. He said he didn't know what to do with it. He said he'd been holding on to it for 2 years. He said, "I just need someone to know." I took the paper. I told him I would keep it safe. I kept that promise for 21 years. I want to be honest with you about why I never did anything with it. Partly it was fear. Partly it was that Ronnie had signed an NDA and I didn't want to make things worse for him. Partly it was that I was a single mother working overnight shifts, and filing a complaint against a well-connected construction firm in Tennessee felt like a battle I couldn't afford to lose. But partly, and this is the part I'm least proud of, it was inertia. The document sat in a manila envelope at the back of my filing cabinet, and the years went by, and Garrett grew up, and I told myself that someone else would handle it. That the world has a way of correcting itself. The world does not have a way of correcting itself. The world does not have a way of correcting itself. I know that now. I learned that Simone's father owned Ashworth and Partners the way you learn most things you weren't looking for. Sideways, by accident. Garrett mentioned the company name in passing. Something about Gerald's business, about the firm he'd started. I was washing dishes when he said it, and the name went through me like cold water. I dried my hands. I went to my filing cabinet. The envelope was still there. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I had a choice to make, and I knew it, and I made the wrong one. At least at first. I didn't tell Garrett. I told myself it was because I didn't want to ruin what he'd found with Simone. I told myself it was because the NDA was Ronnie's, not mine, and it wasn't my story to tell. I told myself a lot of things. The truth is simpler and harder. I was afraid of being the one who broke everything. I had spent 32 years holding things together. Falling apart. Making things fall apart. Felt like something I didn't know how to do. The wedding was in June. A Saturday. 280 guests, which Gerald had apparently insisted on, and a venue outside of Knoxville with a terrace that overlooked the valley. It was beautiful. Simone was beautiful. Garrett cried when he saw her walk down the aisle, and I let myself cry too. Quietly, in the third row, which was where I had been placed. Not the front row. The third. I noticed, and I told myself it didn't matter. And I spent the entire ceremony telling myself it didn't matter, which is how you know something matters very much. At the reception, I was seated at a table near the back with Garrett's college roommate and his wife, a cousin of Simone's I'd never met, and 2 older women who I eventually figured out were Gerald's business associates' wives. They were perfectly pleasant. We talked about the flowers and the food and how the weather had held. Gerald gave a toast. It lasted 11 minutes. I know because I timed it, absently, the way you time things when you're sitting very still and trying to keep your face neutral. He talked about Simone's childhood, about the sacrifices he'd made to give her opportunities, about his pride as a father. He said, "Everything she has, she built on a foundation we gave her." He did not mention Garrett except by first name, once, near the end. He did not acknowledge me at all. Then, when the applause faded and people were reaching for their wine glasses, Gerald looked down the length of the room, not at me directly, but in a way that made it clear he was speaking about me, and said to the table nearest him, "It's a shame the boy didn't have more of a foundation growing up, but what can you expect, really?" He said it quietly, but rooms have a way of going quiet at exactly the wrong moment. 280 people heard it. I heard it. I want to describe to you what happened in my body in that moment, because I think it matters. My hands were flat on the table. I could feel the tablecloth, the weave of it under my palms. My heart was very slow. Not racing, slow, deliberate, the way your heart beats when something has moved past the point of fear and into something else. I thought about Garrett at 4 months old, crying at 2 in the morning, and me walking him around our little apartment in circles because we couldn't afford to let him cry and wake the neighbors. I thought about the cracked dashboard on the 2003 Civic. I thought about Ronnie Pruitt and the folded piece of paper and the 11 weeks I spent at his bedside. I reached into my purse. I had brought the document. I had made copies. I had also, in the weeks since I discovered who Gerald was, spoken to a journalist named Patricia Selden at the Knoxville Sentinel, who had spent 3 weeks verifying what I gave her. Patricia's article was scheduled to run on Monday, but Monday was Monday. This was Saturday, and Gerald Ashworth had just said in front of 280 people that my son didn't have a foundation. I stood up. I am 63 years old. I am 5 feet 4 inches tall. I have white hair that I keep short, and I was wearing a blue dress that Garrett had told me looked nice. And when I stood up, the room did not immediately go quiet because rooms don't always do what they do in movies. So I said, "Gerald." Just that. His name. He turned, and I think something in my face, or maybe something in the quality of the silence that followed, told him this was not going to be a toast. I said, "I'm Loretta. I'm Garrett's mother. I worked as a nurse for 27 years to put that boy through school, and I don't need you to acknowledge my foundation. But there's something I think your guests might want to know about yours." I heard someone put down a fork. I said, "In October of 2003, a man named Ronald Pruitt fell from defective scaffolding on one of your job sites in Knox County. He was 31 years old. He was paralyzed. Your company buried the safety inspection that flagged that scaffolding 6 weeks before the accident." I set the copy of the document on the table in front of me. I said, "I was his nurse. He trusted me with this. I kept it for 21 years because I was trying not to hurt people. But I've decided that protecting the wrong people is its own kind of hurt, and I'm done with it." The room was very quiet. Gerald's face had gone the color of old chalk. His wife had her hand over her mouth. Simone, my daughter-in-law, the woman I already loved, was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Garrett had his hand on the back of his chair, knuckles white. Gerald said, "That is, you can't just," I said. "Patricia Selden at the Knoxville Sentinel has already verified everything in that document. The article runs Monday morning. I'm not here to threaten you, Gerald. I'm here because you called my son's foundation into question, and I wanted you to have the chance to answer for yours." I sat down. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. The rest of the evening is harder to describe. There was a kind of controlled chaos, people leaning toward each other, whispered conversations, Gerald and Renata disappearing somewhere with a man I assumed was their attorney. Simone came to my table. She sat down across from me, and she looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "Did you know, before the wedding?" I told her the truth. I told her I had known for 4 months. I told her I was sorry I hadn't told her sooner. I told her all the reasons I hadn't, and I told her which of those reasons were good ones, and which ones were just fear dressed up as something else. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My father has settled 2 other workplace injury cases that I know of. I've never been able to prove anything." She reached across the table and took my hand. She said, "Thank you for standing up." Garrett didn't speak to me for 6 weeks. I'm not going to minimize that. 6 weeks is a long time. 6 weeks is long enough to wonder if you made the wrong choice, to replay the evening in your mind so many times that the memory starts to feel worn, like fabric that's been folded in the same place too many times. He thought I had ambushed him. He thought I had chosen his wedding day to make a point, that I had used the most important moment of his life as a stage for something that wasn't about him. He wasn't entirely wrong. I wrote him a letter, 8 pages, handwritten. Because some things need to be said in a way that can't be deleted. I told him about Ronnie Pruitt. I told him about the 11 weeks, the folded paper, the weight of carrying it for 21 years. I told him about sitting at my kitchen table the night I learned who Gerald was, and the choice I'd made, and the better choice I should have made sooner. I said, "I should have told you the moment I found out." I told myself I was protecting you, but I was protecting myself from being the person who broke something. I spent 32 years holding things together. I didn't know how to let them fall apart, even when falling apart was the right thing to do. I said, "I am sorry I chose your wedding day. I am not sorry I stood up. He called me on a Sunday evening. He didn't say much. He said, I got your letter. He said, I need more time. I said that was fine. I said I would be here. 2 weeks after that, he drove up from Knoxville and we sat on my back porch and didn't talk about any of it for 3 hours. We talked about his new apartment. We talked about the garden I'd started. At the end of the evening, when he was putting on his jacket, he stopped in the doorway and said, Mom, I know you worked hard. I know what it cost you. I've always known. That was enough. It was more than enough. The article ran on Monday as scheduled. Patricia Selden did good work, thorough, careful, fair in the way that good journalism is fair, which means it gives you the facts and trusts you to be an adult about them. 2 other former subcontractors came forward in the weeks that followed. OSHA opened an investigation. The outcome of that investigation is still pending as of the time I'm telling you this story. Ronnie Pruitt called me the week the article ran. He'd been contacted by Patricia's editor for a follow-up piece. He was going to speak on the record this time. His lawyer had reviewed the NDA and believed it was no longer enforceable given the pattern of behavior the article documented. His voice on the phone was different from how I remembered it. Steadier, like something that had been pressed down for a long time had finally been given room. He said, I always wondered if you'd kept it. I said, I told you I would. He was quiet for a moment. He said, Thank you, Loretta. Simone is pregnant. She told me in October, 3 months after the wedding. She called me first. Before her own mother, she said, which I tried not to read too much into, but probably will for the rest of my life. We're having a girl. They've already decided on a name, and they're not telling anyone until she's born, which I think is exactly the right instinct. Gerald and Renata did not attend Thanksgiving. I don't know what the future of that relationship looks like, and I suspect Simone doesn't either. Some things take longer than a season to sort themselves out. What I know is this. On the night of my son's wedding, I swept up the broken glass myself. I always have. But this time, when I was done, I didn't put the pieces in a drawer. I didn't set them carefully on a shelf and hope no one would notice the crack. I let them go. I'm 63 years old. I have white hair and a 2019 Honda Civic with a working heater and a garden that's finally starting to take. And I have a son who knows what it cost and a daughter-in-law who took my hand across a table on the hardest night of the year and said thank you for standing up. Some foundations are built with money. Some are built with something else. Gerald Ashworth can decide for himself which kind lasts. I've thought a lot about what it means to carry something for 21 years. Not a grudge, not bitterness, a piece of paper. A man's trust. A quiet promise made in a hospital room at 3 in the morning when everyone else had gone home. People talk about doing the right thing like it's simple, like it's obvious. Like there's a clear moment when the correct path lights up in front of you and all you have to do is walk toward it. In my experience, it's never like that. The right thing and the easy thing share almost no overlap. And the right thing and the timely thing, those two are barely on speaking terms either. I made mistakes in this story. I want to be honest about that because I think the mistakes matter as much as anything else. I knew who Gerald Ashworth was for 4 months before that wedding. 4 months. I told myself I was protecting Garrett, protecting Simone, keeping the peace before it needed keeping. But what I was really doing was protecting myself from having to be the person who said the hard thing out loud. I had spent 32 years being the one who held everything together. Falling apart, letting things fall apart, felt like a kind of failure I didn't have language for. What I've come to understand is this. Silence has a cost. It collects interest, quietly, in the dark. And eventually the bill comes due whether you're ready or not. Ronnie Pruitt paid that cost with his legs. With 11 weeks in a hospital bed. With years of a life that looked nothing like the one he'd planned. I didn't cause that, but I held something that might have helped. And I kept it filed away because acting on it felt complicated and staying quiet felt manageable. There is no version of that I'm proud of. What I am proud of is this. When the moment came, when Gerald Ashworth stood in that beautiful room and decided that my son's life could be dismissed in a single quiet sentence, I did not stay in my chair. Not because I was brave. I'm not sure bravery is quite the right word for what it was. It was more like a calculation, instant and clear. I had already paid the price of silence. I knew exactly what it cost, and I was not willing to pay it again. That's what 32 years of doing hard things alone teaches you, if you're paying attention. Not that you're fearless, but that you already know you can survive the hard thing because you've already done it, over and over, in kitchens and hospital corridors and car rides home at midnight. You know what it costs. And sometimes, knowing the cost is what gives you the courage to spend it. Garrett and I sat on my back porch a month after the wedding and didn't talk about any of it for 3 hours. That silence was different from the other kind. It was the silence of two people who know each other deeply enough that words are sometimes beside the point. When he stood up to leave, he stopped in the doorway and said he'd always known what it cost. That was everything. Integrity isn't a feeling. It's a practice. You build it the way you build anything real. Slowly, imperfectly, over a long time, with a lot of days when you got it wrong and tried again the next morning. Gerald Ashworth built his foundation on buried documents and paid silences. I built mine on 32 years of showing up. The difference, in the end, was which one held.